But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome you all to Let's Talk Black Girls Do Bike with Jennifer Lindsay and Lati Horton. We're going to have a good crew today, and I'm really excited about this. My name is Liz Harris. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for Bike Walk KC as the events and marketing coordinator. We like to do these Let's Talk events because they give us a chance to bring in partners from other organizations to talk about the awesome work that they're doing and to share how they are making a difference and elevating the bicycling community across the Kansas City region. Here we go. Let's. Couple more folks in. So I would like to introduce Lati Horton. Lati Horton is our community ambassador, and she's also an AmeriCorps Vista. She works with neighborhoods to help local leaders advocate for safer streets. And today she is going to talk with Jennifer about all sorts of things. And I will let Lati introduce those all sorts of things.
Thank you, Liz. I'm Lati, and I'm going to help introduce our guest, Jennifer Lynn. Jennifer Lindsay recently started a KC chapter of Bike Girls Do Bike, a national organization focused on growing and supporting a community of women of color who share a passion for cycling. They champion efforts to introduce the joy of cycling to all women, but especially women and girls of color. Jen, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your bike story?
Sure. So my name is Jennifer Lynn, and I have lived in Kansas City for about 8 years now. I'm originally from St. Louis. Go Cardinals. Sorry, guys, had to do it. But, oh, Amy. But I've loved my time here in Kansas City. And if it's any consolation to Amy and the rest of the people on the call, a majority of my bike riding experience has been here in Kansas City. That's where I started riding. That's where my passion for riding really blossomed. I've been riding for about 7 years now, and I originally started on my hybrid bike, and I have been sort of making the casual progression into riding different types of bikes. I went from my hybrid to road bike, and now I'm the proud owner of a gravel bike. So that's kind of been Thank you. That's kind of been my progression as I've been cycling. And I really owe it, a lot of it, to Bike Walk KC for connecting with different people that cycled in the community, and then just kind of finding my way throughout Kansas City on a bicycle. It's helped expose me to lots of different things to do here in the city. So, yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us more about your organization and how Black Girls Do Bike got started on the national level and what compelled you to bring a chapter to Kansas City?
Yes, so the founder, Monica Garrison, she actually is located in Pittsburgh. She established Black Girls Do Bike in 2013, and it was a result of her going on a group bike ride. It wasn't necessarily a race, but she went to a group bike ride to find other cyclists, and she was the absolute only Black woman there out of, she said, about 500 cyclists. So that automatically sparked in her a desire to find other women of color who also biked, so that she could find her sense of community within the cycling world outside of just the cyclists that she saw immediately when she went on that bike ride. So she decided to branch it out. And she asked herself this question: do Black girls bike? As a lot of us have asked. Her situation and her experience is actually something that's still very prevalent today, even though that was in 2013. I've experienced it. A lot of other cyclists here in Kansas City that I've talked to and beyond, they've experienced that same feeling. So she decided to call it Black Girls Do Bike, so that we can have that question and we'll find an answer. And we have a way to find our sense of community in the cycling world.
I was going to ask a little bit more about like you starting up the KC chapter. Like, what was that like a little bit more? And like, how's your experience been with like meeting other women of color that like, I guess along the way of journeying of biking?
Yeah, so yeah, you asked me that and I failed to mention that part, but my aunt is actually a huge cyclist, and I've always admired her kind of from a distance in her cycling. And she travels a lot for work. And at one point in time, her job sent her to Wichita. Remember, we're from St. Louis. So she moved to Wichita, Kansas, and that's where she started her own chapter of Black Girls Do Bike in Wichita. She's not there anymore. She actually moved to DC, but while she lived in Wichita, I would often visit her and she would come visit me, and I would borrow one of her old bikes. She had a bike since, her bike that she had was from the 70s and it was very heavy and it was a road bike, and I used to borrow hers. And I was like, I'm gonna get my own bike. So for my birthday, she and I went shopping for a bike for myself. It's my hybrid bike that I still ride. And that kind of sparked the brainchild for me to get involved in cycling. And then when she moved away, I wasn't able to ride with anyone else. And so that's when I decided that I wanted to find a group here in Kansas City. And I figured maybe I could start my own here. So that's what brought that on. Also the pandemic, I needed to connect with people.
That's I feel like we can all relate to that on some level. This is kind of similar, but like, how important has representation been in your journey to cycling? Like, did establishing the chapter here help with how comfortable you felt cycling, or any other ride group or events that are especially geared towards Black women or people of color? Like, do you interact with maybe a lot of other groups kind of similar to yourselves?
Yes. And I mentioned before that Bike Walk KC has been a huge help for me. So the timeline, as far as the progression of when I started our chapter here, Black Girls Do Bike, and when I started cycling on my own, there's a big gap in time there. So a lot of the time that I spent cycling was all completely on my own once my aunt moved away. And when I started to want to progress, as far as my cycling beyond the hybrid bike, I did not know where to turn. I didn't know how to find a bike that was the right size for me. I didn't know the different types of bikes. I started seeing everyone with, at the time I would call them like the fancy handlebars. I'm like, I want the bike with the handlebars like this, the drop bars, but I was like, I want that one. And I had no idea where to go. So I started to go to different bike shops in the area. And a lot of times I felt intimidated when I would go in the bike shops. Let alone did I not see a woman of color. I didn't see a woman at all. So it was it was really hard for me to try to find someone to talk to. And a lot of times I wouldn't even get approached when I would walk through the door. No one would ask me if I needed help. And I just needed to find someone that could help me on like a base beginner level of what I needed to do to progress in my cycling. So at that point, I just tried to find other people online and I would look up different things. I looked on the REI website a lot, like the co-op for like how to get started cycling. I was Googling from ground zero. And then I eventually found this group on Facebook, the KC Bike Swap group. And I knew I wanted to cycle, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to invest in one of those newer bikes because I didn't know what type of cycling I wanted to do. So I found someone that had a road bike for sale and I looked online as far as measurements and which size I needed. And it was kind of on from that point. And then eventually Bike Walk KC had the Women's Bike Summit, and that is where I met Liz. And Liz had on really cool shoes. And I connected with Liz immediately. And I kind of told her my concerns. And when I was there, I saw all these other women of color. And that was the first time I had seen that because I always cycled by myself. And that's when Liz kind of connected me to a lot of other women of color that cycled. I got involved with Major Taylor, which I still am a member of Major Taylor Cycling. And that's predominantly people of color in that group. So that gave me the exposure that I needed. So I was no longer riding alone.
Do you feel like there's common misperceptions and barriers that may hold people, especially like Black women, back from biking?
Yes. And I attribute a lot of that for just going to bike races or going to group cycling when you don't see anyone of color there. So I think that we as in Black women weren't only making the assumption that Black women don't cycle. That's showing all the other groups that we're not out here either. And that's really not the case. It just was that we didn't have the exposure or the accessibility at first to take part in those things. Or the fact that I had to dig so hard to just find someone in my immediate circle that also cycled, that was a lot of reaching. And if I could imagine if someone wasn't going to do the work, how isolating that could be, and you would just stay in the same place. But I had to physically do a lot of work. And I know a lot more people, especially maybe that aren't people of color that all know a cyclist, And I just didn't. I only had my aunt. And when she moved away, that was it. So.
I guess I kind of had a off question too, like in a sense of, do you think it has more to do like Black people don't necessarily, not necessarily Black people, but maybe they're not aren't a lot of women of color, and maybe not because of representation, but maybe it could have other factors like time, social class, and like even where they live.
Yes, definitely. So the accessibility for one, as far as where you may live, if you're living in a city, it could be a little bit more difficult to get started, or even just finding a bike to ride. Bikes are expensive. So that is a hobby that I've taken on, but it's an investment. So also, as I've progressed in the cycling, in my cycling, I've noticed the prices have too. So that has been something that I've considered as far as accessibility. And one of the things, as far as a stat that I noticed too, and that's aside from cycling, one of the things that keeps me active is I saw a stat that a lot of Black women, sometimes you don't work out due to your hair. And I understand that it is a commitment as far as me sweating and getting my hair. If I've gotten my hair straight and I'm sweating, I understand that that is also a time commitment for me to have to re-straighten it again. I purposely wear my hair in protective styles so that I can be active. You will always catch me with braids, like always some braids or twist, or I'll just have a high ponytail because I understand that the time it takes in order to do my hair when I do sweat and I am active. So
I was like, do you have to slick it back at times? If I wanted to put on a helmet, can I do it with my afro out, or do I probably need to wear a different style?
oh, I love talking about this, the helmets for protective styles. So one of the things that I love, especially about Black Girls Do Bike on a national level too, is we have a link on our page that directs you to helmets that are best for fitting protective hairstyles. So I have a helmet that really has a lot of adjustment settings. I will tell you, this is a safe space. It is an extra large. So this is because of my hair, okay?
Okay. It's like, not because you have a big head. Okay.
Yeah, big brain, you know. So I have that size helmet, but it has additional settings on it. And I chose that one in particular because sometimes, well, most of the time I do have braids, but let's say right now I have Marley twist. If I'm going to box braids, it's going to be different. Or if I go to maybe straight backs, it'll be different. Or if I'm wearing my own natural hair. And so I needed a helmet that would adjust with me in all of those different hairstyles. And so I found that helmet in particular on that Black Girls Do Bike website. And so we share that in our Facebook group as well, so that other women of color, if they're having that same issue, maybe they can't fit it over their hijab, there's all these different options of helmets now that you can wear that will adjust to all the hairstyles that you adjust to.
Okay. So you be looking like you kind of convinced me with the helmet. So
Yeah.
if I wanted to start biking, but I haven't been on a bike in forever, say since I was like in middle school or something, what would your advice be to me, or how would I get started in that area?
Okay, so again, this was me. So I get it. And I always want to foster that environment that is welcoming and inclusive for the beginners, because a lot of times I'll see like 0 to 100, meaning I'll see a cyclist who maybe is just kind of wobbly on the street, which is okay too. And then I don't see that middle ground. I see automatic, they have on a whole kit and they have the clip, they're clipping in and they're dressed. And I'm like, okay, I need something in the middle. So I'm like, how did you get from this to this? So my advice, if you are just getting started cycling and maybe you haven't been on your bike since, maybe your earlier years, number one is to refresh your memory of all of the like bike safety and get kind of an update of bike safety precautions and also the laws. That was one reason why I really wanted to start Black Girls Do Bike during the pandemic, is because during the bike boom, we saw all of these new cyclists getting out on the road, and they would just ride as they probably did when they were kids in the middle of the street. They're riding close to cars, not looking back before they turn, not signaling. And I understand you get excited when you're on a bike, but I'm like, I want you to be safe. So I would say refresh, your refresh all of your skills as far as safety and precautions. My second piece of advice is do not skip the helmet. I I know that it's tempting because you're riding your bike and you know, people feel like I'm not gonna fall. No, you need your helmet, so don't skip that. If you are looking to buy a bike, make sure that you put a helmet in your budget and then also lights if you plan on riding on the streets. I use my lights all the time at this point, even on trails. So yeah, budget for all those materials. And then my last piece of advice is purchase your first bike, maybe secondhand. This has been something that I'm really like, I'll die on that hill about purchasing your bike secondhand. It's not only good for the environment, but it keeps the waste down and it allows you to maybe fall or figure out what type of cycling you do like instead of making the investment in a new bike for, let's say, $1,000. And then you decide that this is not something you want to pursue anymore. Maybe it was fleeting and it lasted for a summer, which is okay, but then you're stuck with this bike. So I want to make sure that I am encouraging people to buy secondhand. There's plenty of areas you can buy another bike or bike from someone else.
Okay, so now I've started biking. Do you guys have group rides, and like how do you organize those?
Yes, we have group rides once a month, or it's either a ride or an activity. So
Mhm.
this past time we had yoga for cyclists. So we focused on stretches that are good for your hips and hip flexors. And so we're trying to keep COVID in mind too, but we've just started thinking about having outdoor rides again. We did a few virtual rides together, and that consists of me making a playlist or anyone else. We'll ask people to share their playlists and then you share your route that you've made on Strava, and then we all ride it together at some point, together but apart. We'll ride that. We also had a bike ride last year where we took a trip to all the BLM street murals. That was probably the one that stood out to me the most. Looking at those street murals on a bicycle, I would say that's probably the best way to view it, as opposed to if you had a drone. Drone's probably number one, but
Yeah,
then second, but then second is on your bike because you can actually get out and look at the details.
that does sound nice and really beautiful. Are there any plans for longer group rides in the future?
Yes, so I try to mix up the rides. I try to have maybe a shorter ride and then maybe a shorter ride. We usually do maybe 6 miles because I want to make sure that I'm attracting those entry level riders too. And I don't want to give anyone sticker shock by saying, 30 miles. So I try it with a smaller ride first, maybe 6 miles. And then we also do a ride in between that's usually 15 to 17 miles. And we'll call that like our intermediate ride. And then we have our advanced rides, and those are usually going to be the 30 milers. So I try to do that so each person doesn't feel like, oh, and they're all no drop, by the way, but I do that so each person can feel like they have an opportunity to go for a ride and they don't feel intimidated. So a lot of times if I'll post a ride, maybe it's 17 miles, they'll say, well, I'll catch you on the next one. And I'm like, perfect. We can do 6 miles. I like those rides too, because I like to stop and look at things. So I appreciate all different types of riders. So we try to mix it up, and they're all in different locations in the city too. Kansas City, is unique to the fact that we have people that live in Missouri and in Kansas. So some rides will go to Shawnee Mission Park, some, will go on the Missouri side. So there's a little bit of variety for everyone.
Okay, so like, what's your favorite places in Kansas City to ride? Any preferred routes or like best landmarks to see on two wheels besides the Black Lives Matter murals?
Oh, yes, yes. Because that one is probably my favorite, seeing those murals. But I also like Indian Creek Trail a whole lot. And reason being, the first one is I feel like I'm really doing something because I can cross state lines. And I'm like, yeah, I rode from Missouri to Kansas. But then secondly is because I love, again, this is something that Liz talked me into, right? All season riding. So seeing all of the season changes on that Indian Creek Trail has been something that I missed out on. I used to never ride when it was cold outside. But again, the pandemic, I started to get out a little bit more. And like maybe 28 to 30 degrees is probably my cutoff. But if you're dressed appropriately. We talked about this. It's a gear issue. So
I was gonna ask a little bit more about that, because how do you dress appropriately for biking, but not overdressing to where you're not too bulky on a bike?
no, I get it. It's an art. It's an art. Um, so riding Indian Creek Trail in all those seasons, it's been my favorite. I love to see it in the fall. I love to see it, especially in the winter now, because I like to see the leaves after they've already fallen down. I love the transition. I love going in the summer because there's parts of it that are really well shaded. And I do appreciate a trail that I love a trail that has really good upkeep, but I do like to see nature in its natural element. I like to see a few trees that have fallen over, and that's why sometimes it takes me an hour to ride 10 miles, because I'm getting off my bike and looking at everything.
That's fair. What's like the hardest part about cycling in a city that's not like super bike friendly? Like, we're not as progressive some cities have, but what insights do you wish you could share with policymakers about our built environment?
Oh, wow. So, and I mentioned this before too about the laws being a little bit vague as far as the distance required to pass a cyclist when you're in a car. And so it says a safe distance, and that is very subjective, because what is a safe distance? And I've noticed before, and I talked to you guys about this, about me becoming a better motorist now that I'm a cyclist. I'm a lot more cognizant of cyclists now that that I am a cyclist. So I make sure that I'm taking a look out for other cyclists. Even if I'm not that close to them, I still keep an eye on them to make sure that they're safe. So things like that, I wish that policymakers would take a look at the bike laws that are currently around to make sure that they're not vague and they don't leave so much room for error. Also, some of the bike markings on the street, a lot of times I've noticed that motorists are not aware of what those are, like the bike box for a left turn, or even on Gillum, the cycle track, the green parts are for like openings, so entrances, exits, and it shows the opening. I talked to a few of my friends about it, and they're like, I had no idea what that meant. Or just increasing the overall knowledge of motorists when it comes to cycling. I don't know how they facilitate that, but a lot of the questions my friends will ask, or if I'm in the car with them, they'll say, why don't they ride their bike on the sidewalk? And I'm like, that's actually not the safer option, but just hearing their frustration, and it's just on the premise that they don't know. So, and if you were an actual cyclist, you would understand why riding on the sidewalk isn't really a viable option. So
That's fair. I was gonna say that has been something that kind of came up a lot. I was like, because I don't feel like it's in the driver's handbook as much, letting people know how to use the lanes. And since they're kind of getting introduced a little bit more into KC, a lot of people have been kind of showing a lot of frustration because it's not something that's taught,
yes.
even though it should be. But for the future, what are some of your goals for Black Girls Do Bike, and what would you like to see like expanded across the region?
I'd love for us to have a lot more partnerships with maybe some bike shops in the city. I would love for us to have a lot more events so that more people can get the word out. And I always say that I'm a cycling enthusiast. You know, I'm not an expert, I am an enthusiast. Like, I love all things bikes. So I would just like to serve as kind of that liaison of maybe helping cyclists find their home. So for example, if there's someone that joins Black Girls Do Bike and maybe they decide that they are more of a road cyclist or a gravel cyclist, I would point them in the direction of like Major Taylor. Or if there's someone who is a mountain biker, which we have a few in Black Girls Do Bike, we've branched out and we're starting to host mountain biking rides so that they have a place. Now, I went on one. I will tell you, that's not my forte. I get afraid. There's no way. It took me about 30 minutes to make a jump, and yeah. So yes. So I want to have that place for them too, because I can't lead those types of rides. So wanting to make sure that we not only diversify as far as our partnerships, we diversify our rides too, so that everyone has a space. If they're a distance rider, or if there's someone like me and they may want to get into like bike packing, that's something that I've had on my list for a long time. So I want to make sure that I'm able to, point them in the right direction. So I just want us to be a hub.
Okay, that sounds interesting overall. Are there any particular chapters that you're watching to get a better sense of what you want to do here in KC?
Yes, Black Girls Do Bike St. Louis, of course, because my hometown, but then also Black Girls Do Bike Cleveland and Wichita. And I will take a second to mention Black Girls Do Bike Cleveland. They are really killing it. They have a lot of activities that they do. Cleveland's becoming a very bike-centric city as a whole. And so they've been pivotal as far as helping out with some of the lawmaking that's going on. And they do a lot of test rides for the city, just to kind of help figure out what would be a good route or a good place to add a bike lane. So they've been really good. I've enjoyed watching them. So not only am I a member of Black Girls Do Bike Kansas City, we also encourage each other to go on our other group pages so that we can get ideas from one another.
Okay. I was like, I think that's all the questions we have, but we were going to turn to the chat.
Yeah, we've got a question here. Is there a Black Girls Do Bike in the DMV? And I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Yeah.
And then, does that make sense?
Yeah, it's that, if I can talk, it's DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
Okay, yeah.
And yes, huge. And that's actually where my aunt moved to when she left Wichita. But yeah, that area is very, very nice. I know Arlington, Virginia is where a lot of them are based out of, but yeah, they do have an area, or they do have a chapter in DMV.
And then I know that you have a guide for this, so I am excited to hear your answer. But how did you choose which bike was for you? Cost, etc.
Oh yes, I do have a guide for this. This came after exposure once again, because originally I started off on my hybrid bike, and it wasn't until I got exposure to all the different types of cycling, because it had been so long before, or it had been so long since I've gotten on a bike. And so I didn't know what type of cycling I would enjoy. So after I got a little bit more acclimated and comfortable on a bike, I got on the hybrid bike first. That's when I converted over to my road bike, and switching over to the drop handlebars. That was very foreign to me, and learning how to brake again was difficult for me. So once I got more comfortable on that, it felt more comfortable ergonomically for me to be on my road bike. And then I started riding with a few friends once I found my sense of community, and they all had these gravel bikes. And I got really into gravel biking. I rode some of their bikes before, and that's how I decided that was my next move for myself. So I decided, and that's the number one on my bike guide, is figuring out what type of surfaces you want to ride on. And I figured that out as far as the areas that we're riding on too. So the areas we were riding on too, a lot of the parks here have the gravel, and on my road bike, I was kind of getting left in the dust. So that, and then also I would say try out different types of cycling. Like I said, I tried out mountain biking, tried out road bikes. I've tried just about everything, the e-bikes. So figure that out first. And then establish your budget after you figured out what type of bike it is that you want to buy. So one of the things I put in my guide is, if you haven't purchased a bike in a long time, like since your childhood, the cost of bikes is no longer what it was. So like everything else, bikes have gone up in price, and I didn't want anyone to feel the sticker shock that I felt. I mean, I feel like you'll still feel it when you go into the bike store and you're ready and you're like, wow, this bike is $1,200. I was thinking about $200. So just keeping that in mind. And then also the good thing about going to a bike shop, again, I'm always about buying small, buying local, and then also buying maybe a secondhand bike. But it also is a good idea to go to a professional bike shop to see what size bike you need for yourself. And then you don't have to buy a bike there after you do, but just taking that information. And so, you know, when you do buy a bike secondhand, or if you decide to, you know what size bike is the right one for you. And then after that, when you do purchase your bike, or when you're going to purchase it, make sure you take it for a test ride. Always take it for a test ride. They should allow you to do that. I would think they would encourage you to do that, but make sure you take it for a test ride.
I was like, somebody just added to the chat. You mentioned wanting to get into bike packing. Do any Black Girls Do Bike chapters lead group bike packing trips? Is that something that other group members are interested in? Should be more accessible in the KC area with the Rock Island Trail reaching the city.
Oh, I'm so excited for this. So if anyone here would like to assist me, bike packing, like I mentioned, it's something I'm so eager to do. So the last women's bike summit that we had, that I met Liz at, there was a course on bike packing, and I was incredibly intrigued. And that's also a reason why I wanted to move towards the gravel bike. But at this point, we don't have anyone on Black Girls Do Bike that does bike packing. So this is me going out on my own, trying to figure out and do research. There is someone in St. Louis that leads bike packing for Black Girls Do Bike in her chapter. But if there is anyone even on this call, or I think Liz might do it, please reach out to me, because that is my next venture.
Kind of along those lines, because bike packing can require some different gear. I'm wondering personally, do you have favorite gear that you use? Like, do you have favorite lights? I know you talked about your helmet that you love. What kind of other stuff that goes with your bike do you love?
So I'm on a budget, right? Because the stuff's expensive. So I go to REI quite often, because they actually have that used section there. I shouldn't say used, but it's like a like a secondhand section or pre-owned section, and you can purchase a lot of quality items from there, and they last forever. So I try to go that route, and the reason I've progressed to that side of it is because I was buying a lot of the cheaper items that would just get me through, but I was noticing they wouldn't last very long, and I was kind of losing money because I always had to replace them, with the exception of these one leggings that I purchased on Amazon, and they have fleece inside, but that's it. Everything else was just kind of a 1 or 2 time go, and I had to get rid of it. Also, when we were talking about the gear issue for riding in the cold, I always try to make sure that I get quality items there, so that way I'm not having to do so much layering that it's uncomfortable. So those have been my go-to. Some of the girls in my group have said they've gone to Savers or any other places to get a few pre-owned items. I know they said thrift stores, you'll find some really good finds there if they are trying to remain on a budget. Otherwise, I mean, you can go to the major big stores, you know, your REI, and you can go to the new section, or you can go to Shields or all the other places. But again, if you want to try to stay within budget, those are the options that I usually try to follow.
I'm totally with you on the thrift stores and the used gear section. For sure. So I know that you have worked with Major Taylor some, and you ride with them quite a bit. Do you have any plans with the Black Girls Do Bike group to do any like partnerships or teaming up for group rides or anything like that?
Yes, I try to share all of their group rides too. With Black Girls Do Bike, we have a lot of intersectionality. As I mentioned before, we all are here to support each other, and we are limited as far as a lot of the cyclists that are Black and getting involved in the group. So we really support one another a ton. Denisha Snell, I text her all the time. She helps out. If you know her, she is the bike goat. So she helps out with me a lot if I have any questions, because she's really experienced. She actually helped me when I was purchasing my gravel bike, because she loves gravel bikes, and I got the same one that she has. So we definitely kind of intermingle a lot. I went on a trip to Arkansas last year. We did the Bentonville to Fayetteville ride with Major Taylor. So we're just kind of one big happy family. So if there's a ride I have, they can come, and vice versa.
So one thing that Bike Walk KC is working on right now is getting more people in Kansas City trained to be LCIs. So that's League Cycling Instructors, and that's a specific and designation by the League of American Bicyclists. And the reason that we're doing that is because LCIs can carry insurance through the league, which means that if you're on a group ride and yourself or somebody else is hurt on the group ride, that can help cover that ride and cover yourself. And also it creates you talked about like people being safe when they ride, and all of these brand new riders who've bought pandemic bikes, and many of us, and it's more league cycling instructors means that there are more role models out there and more leaders in the cycling community that can help teach these folks how to ride. So are you planning on becoming an LCI?
I would love that. I've done my prerequisite with Bike Walk KC, and that's the Confident City Cycling class, which I highly recommend for everyone. So that is something that kind of, and the title is right, Confident City Cycling. I would ride in the city. Sometimes I ride to work, and I would be very, very nervous. So now that I have the knowledge to ride carefully and safely, I feel a lot better. I encourage all of the members of Black Girls Do Bike to also take that course as well, especially if they're going to go on a ride with me. Like, make sure you take the course. So I do plan on taking that next step to become an LCI. As we said, representation is key. And I also met with Mitchell, who I know is an LCI and part of Bike Walk. He's also someone that has mentored me throughout my cycling journey. So yeah, that would be an honor. I would love to further my cycling in that way.
So just so folks know, we are, Amy mentioned in the chat, we're raising money for LCI scholarships that are specifically going to Black people, people of color, Indigenous people, and folks in the LGBTQ plus community, because we understand that representation is important, and the more people that ride bikes and the more different kinds of people that ride bikes, the healthier and stronger and richer the bicycling community is, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So if you registered today for this program, you probably saw that in the ticket option. We will share a link to that fundraiser as well, because I would love for you all to share this with your friends and your family and the people that you ride with, and really help us get out the word about these scholarships so we can get more people. LCI certification is very expensive. It's like $500, and we fly in a like master instructor, I forget what they're called, to do the actual certification, and it's a long and intense course. It's really involved, and it really means something for your group ride leaders to be LCI instructors. So we're excited to have healthy support from the community so far. So we'll post that link in the chat, and you can share that around with everybody you know and ask them to help support a more diverse and richer cycling community. So we have a question from Bethany. Jennifer, how can we as the cycling community as a whole help support Black Girls Do Bike and the work you're doing?
Excellent. And Bethany, thank you for coming. So Bethany, I think you know the answer to this too, because you've already been doing it. But the reason I'm calling Bethany out is because I had a meeting with her last week to talk about different ways that we can create more inclusion when it comes to cycling, and that's overall. So if you're hosting a ride, or if you own a bike shop, or if you're thinking about doing anything cycling related, invite us to the table, give us a seat at the table, and we can talk about different ways to make it more inclusive, because that is half of the battle. If you're asking those questions, maybe we can reveal to you ways that have disparate impact and you just have no idea. So just inviting us to the conversation, that really helps out a lot, and we can kind of brainstorm, and then who knows what comes from that. We can maybe establish some partnerships, or we could just figure out different ways to help out on both sides. So just fostering those relationships and continuing to spread the word really, really helps. So if you know a cyclist too who's a person of color and they just don't know where to start, point them in our direction. And if I can't help them, I can at least find someone else that can, but I will try my best to do all that I can.
All right, I'm going to open it up to just the last few questions. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask Jennifer or like to ask Lati, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. This has been a really meaningful conversation, and I always just love seeing Jennifer and Lati. I would describe them both as rays of sunshine in my day, and I hope you have all just been delighted also by their conversation. We've got the link for the scholarships that Amy just posted in the chat. So feel free to just like copy and paste that and stick it in your group chat, in your like family email list, like spam everybody you know, and let's make this happen. So speaking of training opportunities, while people are still thinking of their last few questions, speaking of education and training opportunities, we have a couple of classes coming up for adults with Bike Walk KC that are free. So the first one is this weekend. We have a virtual How to Commute by Bike class coming up. We'll go over the rules of the road and give some demonstrations about bike handling and talk about ways that you can start riding in an urban setting, or riding to work. Or, as I like to say, riding for ice cream. I don't ride to work as often anymore because I'm at home, but I'm still riding to ice cream. So we'll talk about those kinds of things. And then next week, so 1 week from Saturday, is the in-person How to Commute by Bike. So if you are comfortable and ready to get out and ride with other people, we're going to have an outdoor distance class on how to ride to work. It's going to be in the MARC, the Mid-America Regional Council parking lot. So that's downtown Kansas City. And there are, I'll post the links to these so that you can see the address to that. These are both sponsored by Rideshare KC and MARC. They've been great partners in it, and it's all about Bike Month. With the in-person class, there will be a group ride and some hands-on practice. So if you're ready to get started, this will offer you a little bit more practical knowledge and practical education on how to do that. And those classes are both free. They're going to be a lot of fun, and I really just, you know, as Jennifer was saying earlier, like there's all different kinds of biking, and we want to support people in however they want to ride. And if that is riding to the grocery store or riding to work, then those are just a few car miles that you're not paying for gas, and you're not putting that wear and tear on your car, and you're making our streets a little slower and a little safer and a little quieter, which is awesome. And you get to connect with your neighbors and meet people a little more face to face. All right, well, I gave you all a chance to get your last questions in. And I don't see any further ones, so I'm going to let Lati and Jennifer, do you have any last things that you'd like to cover?
No, thanks for listening to us, though.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually overwhelmed by you guys' attendance. I appreciate it so much. And make sure you wear your helmet and get lights on your bike.
Safety first message from Jennifer
Yes.
Lynn. Well, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Lati, for hosting today, and Jennifer for joining us. This has been great. We love to have you. Thank you to our Bike Walk KC members who support our little virtual events that we're having throughout the year. Stay tuned for more. We appreciate your attendance and we appreciate your support. and we'll see you on the road. Thanks very much.